Story 1. This happened maybe 8 or 9 months after I moved into my first house. I was 24 then, fresh out of college, and finally working a decent job that made me feel like I was starting real life. The house itself wasn't fancy, but it had one feature everyone commented on: the basement. It was huge, and I mostly treated it like a storage unit that happened to be attached to my home. The previous owners had done this strange DIY layout down there. They'd sectioned the basement off into separate rooms using plywood sheets and open framing, like half-finished walls. At the bottom of the stairs was the main open area. Off to one side was the laundry section. Farther back, there was what looked like it was meant to be a workshop. And then there was this awkward back room that was basically storage. Because of all those partitions, the place felt like a maze. No matter where you stood, you couldn't see the entire basement at once. When I toured the house the first time, I remember thinking it was kind of cool in a weird way, like hidden corners and extra space. I didn't spend time down there though. The only reason I ever went into the basement was to do laundry. That's what I was doing that night. It was a weeknight, nothing special. Just a normal evening where I realized I was out of clean clothes and had to deal with it. When I opened the door and headed toward the basement stairs, I noticed the basement lights were already on. It was odd, but I didn't let it sink in like I should have. I'd been down there a few days earlier, and I honestly figured I'd just forgotten to flip them off. I wasn't the most organized person back then, and that explanation felt easy. Even with the lights on, the basement always looked dim. I never replaced the old yellow incandescent bulbs that were there when I moved in, so everything had this weak, tired glow, like it was permanently stuck in late evening. I started down the stairs with my laundry basket, and everything changed so fast my brain barely kept up. I got to the bottom and started walking toward the laundry area when something moved in the edge of my vision. It was the kind of motion your body reacts to before your mind makes sense of it. My head turned automatically, and I locked eyes with a man. He was crouched behind one of the folding tables I'd set up near the far corner, like he'd been hiding there, low and still, waiting for something. I remember my hands tightening on the basket so hard my fingers hurt, and for a second I almost dropped it. My mind refused to accept what I was seeing. A stranger was in my basement. Inside my house, close enough that I could see his face clearly in that sickly yellow light. The look he gave me wasn't confused or scared. It wasn't the look of someone who accidentally wandered somewhere they shouldn't be. It was this hard, unpleasant stare, like I'd interrupted him and he didn't like it. He looked filthy, like he'd been sleeping rough for a long time, hair matted, skin grimy, the kind of dirty that doesn't come from one bad day. It made my stomach flip. For a moment, neither of us moved. I couldn't. I just stood there, frozen, staring at him while he stared back. Then he stood up, and he ran. Not at me. Deeper into the basement, just into those partition rooms in the back. The sound of his feet hitting the concrete snapped something loose in my head. I finally moved, but not forward. I started backing up toward the stairs, keeping my eyes on the dark shape of the maze-like area he disappeared into. I must have lost time. Not much, but enough, because before I could reach the first step, every light in the basement cut out. All of them, instantly. Until that moment, I'd never been in that basement with the lights off. I had no idea how black it could get down there. It wasn't like a dim room where you can still make out outlines. It was total darkness. Thick, absolute, like the air had weight to it. I couldn't see my own hands. I couldn't see the stairs. I couldn't even see the faint glow from upstairs anymore because the angle and the doorway blocked it. I still assumed I knew my own house. That was my mistake. I kept moving toward where I thought the stairs were, stepping carefully, feeling my way through empty space. Then I misjudged something. Maybe a table leg, maybe the edge of a partition, and I went down hard, tripping and hitting the concrete floor. The impact knocked the wind out of me. When I pushed myself up, I realized I had no idea which direction I was facing anymore. The fear and adrenaline made everything worse. My brain was loud and useless at the same time, like it was spinning, but not producing a single helpful thought. And then I remembered my phone wasn't in my pocket. It was upstairs, sitting on the counter like it always did when I was home. No flashlight, no quick call, nothing but me in the dark. I started yelling. Not just calling out. I mean yelling like someone who'd lost control, because I thought maybe if I sounded unhinged enough, it would scare whoever was down there. I screamed into that pitch black space, trying to fill the basement with noise so I wouldn't have to hear anything else. It backfired immediately. From somewhere on the other side of the basement, I heard screaming back. The sound hit me like a punch. It wasn't a normal shout. It wasn't someone telling me to shut up or leave. It was this aggressive, raw screaming that carried through the partitions and made the hair on my arms lift. It sounded angry. It sounded close enough to be real, but far enough that I couldn't pinpoint it. I realized, in the worst possible way, that I was screaming into the darkness, and someone else was doing the same thing right back at me, matching my energy, but with something more terrifying behind it. His voice had this edge to it that made him sound like the kind of person who wouldn't hesitate. I stopped yelling, and he stopped too. That silence afterward was almost worse. In the quiet, every tiny sound felt amplified. My breathing was loud in my ears. My heartbeat felt like it was shaking my chest. I forced myself to move because staying still down there felt like giving up. I started feeling my way forward with my hands out, using the walls and the edges of the plywood partitions to guide me. I had no other option. I moved slow, careful, fingertips sliding over rough wood, exposed studs, the cold metal edge of something that might have been a shelf. Then I heard movement behind me, soft at first, a scrape, a foot shifting, then another sound closer, like he was doing the same thing I was doing, using the layout to move in the dark. I couldn't tell if he was walking or crouching, but whatever he was doing, he was closing the distance. The worst part was the feeling that he knew where he was. I'd lived there long enough to know the basement in daylight, but not like this, not in complete darkness. With every step, I felt less sure. The basement was massive, and all those partitions made it easy to get turned around even when the lights were on. Now, it was like being trapped inside a black box with walls. The sounds behind me kept creeping closer. I could hear his breathing at one point, this heavy, steady breathing somewhere behind my shoulder. And it made my skin crawl because it meant he wasn't across the room anymore. He was back there in the same space with me, separated only by a few feet of darkness and wood. I honestly thought I was about to be grabbed. Time stretched out in a way I still can't explain. Every second felt too long, like my body was waiting for impact. I kept moving, hands searching, feet dragging carefully across concrete. And then, finally, my fingers hit the wooden base of the staircase. I've never felt relief that sharp in my life. I found the railing and started up fast. I didn't even try to be quiet. I took the first step, then another, already picturing myself bursting out into the kitchen, slamming the door, getting light. Before I could even reach the second step, something clamped around my ankle. My foot was yanked backwards so suddenly I lost my grip on the railing. My head struck against it on the way down and I fell hard, tumbling back onto the basement floor. The pain flashed hot and bright, and for a split second I couldn't breathe. I still couldn't see him, but I could feel him. He was dragging me away from the stairs by my leg, pulling with this strength that didn't make sense. It felt unreal, like being caught by a machine. I kicked and thrashed, both legs going wild, scraping the floor, heels striking wood, trying to hit anything solid. One kick connected. I don't know what I hit. His arm, his shoulder, his face. But whatever it was, it made him loosen his grip just enough. I twisted hard, jerking my leg, turning my body, fighting like an animal. I kept twisting and pulling until I slipped free. The second I felt my ankle come loose, I scrambled up and bolted toward the stairs again, blindly, hands out in front of me. Behind me, he started screaming again, the same furious sound as before, and it pushed me faster. I found the stairs by luck and sheer desperation. My hands hit the railing, and I ran up, skipping steps, half falling upward. I reached the top, burst through the basement door, and slammed it shut behind me with all the force I had. But it wasn't over. That door didn't have a lock. I realized it the moment my hands left the knob. There was nothing to secure it, so I threw my whole body against it, pressing my weight into the door, like it was the only thing keeping me alive, because it probably was. Seconds later, I heard footsteps pounding up the basement stairs. The sound was fast and heavy. And then the door took a violent hit from the other side. The impact made the frame shake. For a horrifying moment, the door actually swung inward a few inches, and I had to shove it back with everything I had. Then he hit it again, and again. He started slamming into it repeatedly, like he was trying to break through by brute force. The door kept jolting under the hits. My feet were slipping on the floor, and I panicked because I could feel how easily I could lose traction. I ripped my socks off without even thinking, anything to keep my feet from sliding, and I braced harder. My shoulders burned, my arms shook. I pressed my back against the door and leaned like my life depended on it, because it did. I don't know why he didn't get through. I still don't know if the door frame held, or if my weight was just enough, or if he got tired, or if something else made him stop. But eventually the slamming ended. I listened, barely breathing, and then I heard his footsteps going back down the stairs, crashing away into the basement. The second I was sure he wasn't on the other side of the door, I sprinted to the kitchen counter, grabbed my phone, and ran back. I planted myself against the basement door again, one hand holding it, the other dialing with shaking fingers. When I called the police, I could barely talk. I remember trying to explain between breaths that someone was in my house, in my basement, and I thought he was going to kill me. I stayed pressed against that door the entire time, not daring to move away from it, listening for any sound of him coming back up. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. I wasn't surprised. I had the sick feeling that he wouldn't be there when they showed up. They searched the basement and found one of the basement windows had been forced open from outside. It didn't take long to understand how he'd gotten in and how he'd left. Nothing in the house was missing. Nothing was stolen. That part almost confused me, because robbery was the only reasonable explanation my brain wanted to cling to. One of the officers suggested something that made my stomach drop even further, that the guy might have been using my basement as a place to hide, maybe even live. The idea hadn't occurred to me until that moment, and once it did, it felt worse than any theft. It meant he could have been down there before. It meant he might have been listening to me upstairs. It meant I might have been living over him without knowing. The police also said something else that stuck with me. Whoever it was had found the basement light switch quickly, even though it wasn't in an obvious spot. That explained the lights being on when I opened the door, and it explained how the lights shut off right when I was trying to reach the stairs. He didn't just get lucky, he knew where to go in that basement. I moved out about 4 months after that night. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, that maybe he just wanted somewhere warm and ran when he got caught. But thinking back on it now, I know what it felt like when he grabbed my ankle in the dark and started dragging me away from the stairs. He wasn't trying to scare me off my property. He was trying to keep me from getting out. Story 2. This happened when I was 14. I'm in my 30s now, so it was close to 20 years ago. My parents had to travel out of state for a wedding, and even though I was technically old enough to stay home by myself, they didn't like the idea of leaving me alone for an entire weekend. The plan was that my older sister would come stay with me. She was already in college, but she lived only about an hour away, so it didn't seem like a big deal. The moment my parents pulled out of the driveway, she sent me a text saying she had some party to go to and she wasn't coming after all. I didn't really care. I didn't call my parents to tell them, partly because I didn't want to stress them out while they were traveling, and partly because I knew what would happen next. They'd scramble to find another adult to sit with me, and I didn't want that. It wasn't like we lived in some rough area. It was a normal 2-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. mostly families. I honestly felt completely safe. The night started off totally normal. I did what any 14-year-old would do with a rare empty house. I played Halo for hours, like an embarrassing amount of hours, because it was one of those things I usually wasn't allowed to do for that long. It wasn't until just after midnight that anything felt off. I was still stretched out on the couch when I heard a light tapping sound. At first it was so faint I thought I imagined it, but then it came again, and I was sure. It sounded like something outside, somewhere toward the backyard, like a small object hitting the siding. My first assumption was wind. It honestly sounded like a branch brushing the house in one spot. I didn't get up. I just listened, a little annoyed more than anything. A few minutes later, I heard it again. Same rhythm, same kind of dull little tick against the wall. But then, the sound started shifting. Instead of coming from one place, it seemed to travel along the side of the house, like whatever was causing it was moving. That's when my stomach tightened a little, because wind doesn't do that in a deliberate pattern. I reached for the remote and muted the TV, and I just sat there, completely still, listening as hard as I could. After a few seconds, there was nothing. No tapping, no scraping, just quiet. I told myself it was probably an animal, something small on the deck, or maybe a raccoon messing with something in the yard. Eventually, I got tired of sitting in silence, convinced myself I was overreacting, and turned the TV sound back on. About 20 minutes passed before I heard another noise, and this one made me a lot more nervous. It was tapping again, but now it sounded like it was coming from below me. The living room was right above the basement, and the sound had that muffled, hollow quality, like it was echoing under the floor. Our basement wasn't finished. It was basically concrete, exposed beams, storage, and in the corner there was a small kitchenette setup. Because it wasn't a real living space, it wasn't crazy to think a stray cat or raccoon could have gotten in through one of the basement windows. There were multiple windows down there that opened right to the outside. I muted the TV again, but this time I stood up. I remember hesitating for a second, trying to decide if it was smarter to ignore it and go to bed, or check and get it over with. The tapping kept happening every few seconds, steady enough that it didn't feel random. I didn't want to go anywhere near it, but I also didn't want to spend the rest of the night imagining things under the house. So I walked over to the basement door. I opened it and stood at the top of the stairs, staring down into the darkness. The basement lights were off, so it was just a black drop beneath me. The tapping sounded louder from there, like I'd moved closer to the source. I don't know why I did this, but I called out, kind of quietly at first, like I was checking if someone was down there. The tapping stopped immediately. That pause did something to me. If it was an animal, you'd think it would keep moving around, or at least make some other noise. The fact that it stopped right after my voice made me feel exposed, like something down there had been paying attention. I thought about turning on the basement lights, but the light switch was at the bottom of the stairs. That might as well have been a mile away. There was no chance I was walking down into a pitch-black basement to find a switch, not when I'd just heard the noise react to me. So I tried to do the next best thing. I slowly pulled the door, mostly shut, until it was only cracked open. Then I slid my hand through the gap with my phone. I aimed it toward where I knew one of the windows was, and I turned the flash on. I didn't even want to look down there while I did it. I actually closed my eyes and recorded for a few seconds. Like somehow that made it safer. Then I yanked my hand back, shut the door, and locked it. My hands were shaking when I opened the video. The footage was grainy and shaky, and the flash made the window area look washed out. But it took me maybe 1 second to see what mattered. There was a person standing inside the basement, underneath one of the windows. Not outside, inside. It was just a dark figure in the flash glare, but it was unmistakably a person. The shape of shoulders, the head, the way they were standing still like they'd been caught in a spotlight. I screamed. I didn't even mean to. It just came out. Then I ran to my room as fast as I could. I slammed the door, locked it, and called my dad. I was talking so fast I could barely get words out. He told me to stay in my room, and he called the police while keeping me on the line through my mom. I remember being on the phone with them, sitting on my bed, trying not to cry, listening for every tiny sound in the house. And then I heard banging on the basement door. It wasn't a light knock, it was heavy hits in a row, like someone was throwing their weight into it. The sound carried up through the floor and made my whole room feel smaller. I remember gripping my phone so hard my fingers hurt, whispering into it that someone was trying to get in. The banging kept going for a few more hits, 5 or 6 maybe, and then it stopped. That silence afterward was horrible because it made me wonder where he went. If he wasn't hitting the door anymore, was he coming upstairs another way? Was he already in the house? I couldn't stop thinking about that video and how close he had been to the window, like he was already positioned to leave if something went wrong. Not long after that, the police arrived. They searched the basement, but by the time they got there, the guy was gone. He'd climbed out through the basement window, the same one he'd been standing under in my recording. The officers were actually nice about it. They didn't brush me off like I was some kid making things up. They even checked our yard and looked around outside, but whoever it was had disappeared. When they went through the basement more carefully, they found that a bunch of stuff was missing. Even though the basement wasn't finished, my parents kept plenty of things down there. Tools, storage boxes, random household stuff. I can't remember everything they said was taken, but there was one detail that stuck with me more than anything else. When the police checked the kitchenette area, they noticed the biggest knife from the rack was gone. Hearing that made my blood feel cold. All I could picture was that figure in the video standing under the window, and the idea that he might have been down there with that knife while I was upstairs on the couch playing video games like nothing was wrong. If it weren't for the video I took, I honestly don't know if the police would have treated it as seriously as they did. A kid saying they heard noises in the basement is easy to dismiss, but the footage made it real. Of course, nothing ever came of it. It was almost 20 years ago, and I never found out who he was or why he chose our house. I don't even know what happened to that phone. It's probably sitting in a box somewhere at my parents' place, buried under junk, if it even still exists. Sometimes I think about that recording, and I wonder if, one day, I'll stumble across that old phone, charge it up, and see that same grainy figure standing under the basement window. Proof that I wasn't imagining any of it. Story 3. This happened when I was 16, about 4 years ago now. I grew up in this big suburban house my parents bought before I was even born. From the street, it looked like every other place in the neighborhood, but once you were inside, it had little odd features that didn't make sense until you lived with them. The biggest one was the basement. It was easily the largest room in the whole house. My parents finished it years earlier and turned it into a casual hangout area, sectional couch, a decent TV, and a couple of storage rooms tucked into the back. You'd think it would be the most used room in the house, but my parents were the type who always stayed upstairs in the living room, so the basement was basically mine. The other thing you need to know is my cat Rocky. He's one of those overly friendly cats who never stops wanting attention. Because of that, my parents had a routine. Every night before they went to bed, they'd put Rocky downstairs so he wouldn't paw at their bedroom door or jump on their bed. He didn't mind it because he had space down there and usually found somewhere to sleep. And here's where it gets a little sketchy, and I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. The basement had an interior door that led straight into the garage. It was supposed to be convenient for carrying groceries in or whatever, but for me, it was convenient for sneaking people into the house without my parents noticing. This all happened on a Friday night. I remember that clearly because I'd invited a girl named Malene over, which I wouldn't have done on a school night. It was late enough that I assumed Rocky was already in the basement. It wasn't like I stopped to think about it. It was more like an automatic assumption because by that time my parents usually had him downstairs already. I figured he was curled up somewhere in the back, probably in one of the storage rooms like he liked to do. That's why I didn't react right away when I heard a noise coming from one of those storage rooms. It was light at first, like a faint rustle, the sound of something shifting around inside stacked boxes. Honestly, I felt justified staying calm because it sounded exactly like something a restless cat would do. Rocky liked climbing into places he wasn't supposed to and pushing things around like it was his job. Malene tensed up a little, but I brushed it off and told her it was just my cat. We went back to pretending to pay attention to whatever was on the TV, but the noises didn't stop. They weren't constant. Every few minutes there would be another soft shuffle or a quiet thump, like something bumped into cardboard or plastic. Each time it happened, Malene would look over at me with that worried expression like she was waiting for me to admit something was wrong. And every time I had to reassure her. I told her Rocky was just hyper sometimes and he climbed on stuff. Which was true, he did climb on everything. So I stayed relaxed, even with the occasional thud in the background, because in my head, it all still fit. I was completely calm right up until I heard scratching at the door at the top of the basement stairs, the door that led up into the main part of the house. The second I heard it, I knew what it was. It was Rocky scratching like he always did when he wanted to be let in, and that meant he wasn't down there with us, which meant the sounds we'd been hearing for the past half hour weren't him. I didn't say anything right away. Part of it was because I didn't want to freak Malene out, and part of it was because my brain was still trying to make it make sense. I remember sitting there, listening to that scratching, feeling this slow, cold realization creep in. Before I could even stand up or say a word, Malene started screaming. It wasn't a normal, startled yell. She screamed like she thought something was about to happen to her. The sound was so sudden and sharp that it jolted me out of whatever I was thinking. I snapped my head toward her and saw she was pointing past me, toward the back of the basement. I turned my head further, and my whole body locked up. A foam football was rolling across the floor. It wasn't bouncing randomly or drifting like it fell off something. It was moving with that smooth roll you'd only see if it had just been tossed. It came from the direction of the storage room. I couldn't see into the back clearly because that area was darker than the main basement, but I didn't need to see a person to understand what it meant. Someone had thrown it. Someone was back there. Someone had been back there the entire time we were sitting on that couch. I didn't think. I didn't try to be brave. I just grabbed Malene's arm and pulled her up off the couch, basically dragging her toward the stairs. We moved fast, stumbling a little, both of us breathing hard. As soon as we got up into the main part of the house, I swung the basement door shut behind us and made sure Rocky didn't slip down. After that, everything turned into chaos. Malene was crying, shaking so hard she could barely talk, and I realized I was shaking too. It was the kind of fear that feels physical, like your muscles can't decide whether to run or lock up. Until that moment, I genuinely didn't know I could be that scared. My chest felt tight, and my hands didn't feel like they belonged to me. My parents picked up on it pretty quickly. They came out, saw us standing there like that, heard Malene losing it, and within minutes, they were calling the police. I can't remember exactly what I said to them because it all blurred together. But I remember trying to explain that someone had been in the basement with us. The police showed up a few minutes later. While they were on the way, I went outside onto the back deck. I kept my eyes locked on the garage area the whole time. I didn't know what else to do, but I knew about that door connecting the basement to the garage, and I was terrified the person would slip out that way. So I watched. I didn't look away. I didn't go back inside. I stood out there, staring at the garage like it was the only thing that mattered, waiting to see the door open or someone run out. The air felt cold and sharp in my lungs, and I remember hearing my own breathing louder than anything else. When the officers arrived, they searched everything. They went through the basement, checked the storage rooms, looked through the garage. They were thorough, and they didn't find anyone. That's where it got weird. There was no sign of a break-in. None of the basement windows were open, and every one of them was locked from the inside. Nothing looked forced. The police came back up and started asking questions that made it sound like they already had a theory. One of them suggested the person must have gotten out through the garage before they arrived, but I know that didn't happen. I was watching the garage the entire time, the whole stretch of time between us running upstairs and the police showing up. I had my eyes on the only way someone could have gotten from the garage to outside. There's one clear path. If someone had come out, I would have seen it. I'm not guessing about that. I'm certain. The police did another sweep, checked a few things, asked my parents more questions, and then eventually there was nothing else they could do. My parents also assumed the same thing the officers did, that the person slipped away, and I somehow missed it. I could tell my dad was especially upset, like he thought I was exaggerating or making the situation worse than it was. But I don't care what they think. I'm telling you, no one left through the garage. I watched it the whole time, and there's no other easy way out. We never got any explanation for how someone could have been back there, close enough to throw something across the floor, and then vanish without a trace. And to this day, my family still has no real answer for what happened that night. Story 4. I think every kid is scared of basements. They're just built to feel wrong. Low ceilings, stale air, shadows in every corner. Even now, as an adult living alone, I still get that uneasy feeling sometimes when I'm heading downstairs late at night to do laundry. It's always worse on the way back up, like something might be behind you. But when I was a kid, I was genuinely terrified of the basement in my family's house. The funny part is, that's where all our video game stuff was. It was the only TV we had besides the one in the living room and the one in my parents' room, so the basement became the unofficial game room. I'm pretty sure this happened when I was 9. I remember being in elementary school, but close to the end of it. On weekends, I'd try to stay up late playing games down there. One I was obsessed with back then was Driver 2 on the PS1. For whatever reason, I could never finish it. I'd spend night after night telling myself I was going to finally beat it, and then getting stuck in the same spots all over again. That night was one of those nights. I usually didn't push it too late, because once my parents went to bed, the basement felt like a completely different place. When I could hear the TV upstairs, or even just the normal sounds of them moving around, it made me feel safer. It was like a reminder that they were right there, just a quick run up the stairs away. The second the house got quiet, my imagination would start doing what it always did. Our old house had the laundry and boiler room down in the basement, same as where I live now. That room was the worst part of the basement by far. It had no windows at all, so it was black in there at any hour of the day. The door always seemed to swallow light. On top of that, it made strange noises constantly. Pipes clicking, the boiler kicking on, weird little knocks that made you stop and listen. Even with the door shut, I'd sometimes pause my game and stare toward that side of the basement, trying to decide if what I heard was normal basement sounds or something else. On this particular night, I heard something that didn't feel normal. It started with the laundry room door slowly creaking open. That sound alone made me hit pause. My heart did that stupid jump it always does when you're already on edge. For a second, the basement was silent in that heavy way basements get, where you can hear your own breathing. Then I heard a sound that still makes my stomach tighten when I think about it. It was like a woman moaning or groaning, drawn out and low. It had this hollow, almost floaty quality to it. The kind of noise that doesn't sound like it's coming from a real person standing in a real room. And it sounded like my mom. Not kind of like. It sounded like her voice. I remember feeling this quick rush of relief, like my brain grabbed onto the easiest explanation. I actually laughed. I'm pretty sure I said something to the effect of, "Okay, nice one," because I thought she was messing with me and trying to scare me. Looking back, even at 9, I should have realized that didn't fit. My mom wasn't the type to play pranks. She wasn't goofy like that. She wasn't the kind of person who'd hide in a dark laundry room and make spooky noises just to mess with her kid. But in the moment, I let myself believe it because believing it felt better. So I got up from the couch and walked toward the laundry room with a little more confidence than I had a few seconds earlier. By the time I reached the doorway, the groaning had stopped. The door was open, and beyond it was just darkness. I stood there staring into that pitch black room, trying to see anything. As I leaned closer, my eyes adjusted just enough for me to make out a shape inside, a person standing in there. I said "Mom," but my voice wasn't as sure anymore. It came out smaller than I meant it to. I took another small step forward, just close enough to get a better read on the outline. And that's when I realized it wasn't her. Something about the shape, the way it was standing, the proportions. My brain finally accepted what my eyes were trying to tell me. I don't know how to explain it other than I just knew. It wasn't my mom in that doorway. I turned and ran. I screamed the whole way up the basement stairs, louder than I thought I could. I flew into the living room, and the fear hit even harder because my parents were right there. My mom was sitting with my dad, both of them upstairs like normal. When I came rushing in, they jumped up immediately, reacting to the way I sounded. I remember yelling that there was a woman in the laundry room. My parents looked at each other for a split second, one of those looks adults give each other when they're silently communicating something, and then they both ran down toward the basement. They shut the basement door behind them hard. I stayed in the living room, shaking and confused, but also a little relieved, because my parents were down there now. In my mind, that meant it was handled. They were adults. They could deal with it. I just stood there listening, waiting to hear them come back up and tell me I'd imagined it. I remember what felt like a long time passing, long enough that my fear started turning into this restless, dizzy feeling. Eventually, my mom came back upstairs. Her face looked strange, tight, controlled, like she was trying to act normal. She told me to go to my room and go to sleep. I didn't ask questions. I didn't argue. I did exactly what she said. I remember lying in bed with my eyes open for a long time, listening to the house, trying to understand what I'd seen and why my parents weren't talking about it. The next morning, my parents acted like it was all a joke. They told me one of their friends had done it to scare me, like it was some big prank. I can't fully remember how much I believed them right away, but I do remember pressing them for details. I wanted to know who it was. My mom told me it was a friend of hers from out of state who was visiting. I didn't really question it at 9, but as I got older, things didn't add up. Every once in a while, the name Debbie would come up, almost like it slipped out by accident. It didn't happen all the time, but enough that I noticed. And whenever I asked who Debbie was, I'd get a different answer. Sometimes it was brushed off. Sometimes it was a friend. Sometimes they'd act like they didn't know what I was talking about. When I was around 14, I remembered that night again and decided to dig for answers myself. I found one of those family tree websites where you can search names and relatives, and I did something I'm not proud of. I took my dad's credit card from his wallet just long enough to pay for the service, then put it right back like nothing happened. I typed in both my parents' names and started looking through the results. Most of it was a mix of familiar relatives and a bunch of people I didn't recognize, but one name jumped out immediately. It said my mom had a sister named Debbie. That stopped me cold. I stared at the screen, reading it over and over. Then I did what any teenager with a burning question would do. I searched Debbie's name along with my mom's maiden name. An obituary came up. Debbie was dead. My heart was pounding as I ran to find my parents. I pulled them over to the computer and showed them what I'd found, demanding an explanation. I still remember the look on their faces. Shock, then nervousness, like they'd been caught off guard in the worst way. My dad looked at my mom and told her to tell me, and that's when my mom finally said it. She told me I had an aunt, Debbie, who was severely mentally unstable, and that she had hurt a lot of people. She said it was always considered safest to keep her far away from me when I was growing up. According to her, Debbie had broken into the house or somehow gotten inside without my parents realizing it. Somehow, she'd ended up down in the basement that night. I had 100 questions. I wanted to know how. I wanted to know why. I wanted details that would make it make sense. But my parents didn't give me much more. They kept repeating that they were protecting me, that they did what they thought was best. Over the years, I'd bring it up sometimes, still trying to piece it together, and they'd shut it down immediately and tell me to drop it. I never found out what they meant when they said she'd harmed a lot of people, but I've had my own ideas. None of them are good. Thinking about it too long doesn't help me anyway. It just leaves me with the same questions I've had since I was a kid. What really happened to Debbie? Why was she in the basement? What did my parents actually do that night after they ran downstairs? And maybe the worst question of all is the one I don't like sitting with. What else did they keep from me? Because they thought I was better off not knowing.